to the crazy ones. The misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Hey guys, I'm Mark Mandel. Welcome to episode number 11 of Customer Experience Unsung Heroes. We've made it to our first year of this program, so thank you for coming on this journey with me. I'm so thrilled to be here with you again for another hour while we're together here. Today's going to be a really cool show, but before we get too far into it, I wanted to take a moment for those of you who might be just visiting us for the first time here at this particular episode. Let me take a moment to introduce myself now that we've been doing this work together for about a year, and also introduce this show more correctly to you. As I said, my name is Mark Mandel. I've been a long-time customer experience guy. I'll tell you how long. It's been coming on 30 years now that I've been in this space, long before they called it customer experience work, and we're going to come back and touch upon that in a few minutes. This show is a very special show to me. It's one I do a lot of video work with you guys over the last year, and I've become very excited by this work. Sharing video content with you guys is a meaningful way for me to connect with you guys and for you to connect back with me, and I'm thrilled to be doing this program with you. This particular series that I call my Unsung Heroes show is, of all the shows that I've put together, my most favorite. And if you haven't heard me talk about it before, because this may be a new show for you, let me take a moment and just tell you a little bit about why it's important to me. You know, some of my most favorite people that I've met over the years who are in the customer experience work world are the people that we never hear about. They're the people who are always sort of, I keep calling, in the machine room, the place with the big gears and kind of the big levers, doing the behind the scenes work to keep everything moving forward. These are not necessarily the people who are at the conferences, up on stages, winning trophies and awards and always getting a lot of spotlight time. These are the people who are there doing the real work, and for the people who have an opportunity to touch people that way. I built this show for those people. I built this show to bring people who we don't necessarily see and hear about day in and day out. They're not the usual people who are out there on the scene doing their very public accolade type work. And I want to give them a platform. I want to give them support. I want to show them my interest in hearing their story and to share their story with you. And that's why I do this show in particular. I call it Unsung Heroes because I feel A, they're heroes for the work that they do, and B, as I said, they don't get a whole lot of public recognition for that work, although no matter how good their work is. And I wanted to use this show for that purpose. While we're together, just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the real heart of the show. Whether you're here now during the live stream of this show or catching it on a playback through either the LinkedIn platform or the YouTube platform, do me a favor. Hit the like button, do me a favor, put a comment in the comment screen, give us some feedback. We'd love to hear your thoughts, ask questions of my guest and I in a couple of minutes. And let's just kind of have this more of a conversation if we can, more so than just, in this case, Danielle and I sitting here talking with one another. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to do a couple of things that I really enjoy doing on these particular shows. And the first one is to show you my appreciation for you coming here with me. And the way I like to show appreciation, my wife would say that feeding people is my love language. I'm not sure that I can feed you today, at least in terms of conventional food, but what I do enjoy doing is sharing knowledge. And I've been giving copies of a couple of books that I really think are terrific to people who've just asked for them. And I want to do that with you here, just as a way for me to say thank you for, again, coming along on this journey with me for the last year. The first book I want to talk about is called Experience Rules. I don't know if you can see the cover here clearly enough. This is written by a couple of good friends of mine, Michael Hinshaw and Diane Majors. You guys may know Michael from his work at a company called M Corp, and Diane mostly through her work on her own these days. And she used to be the prior CEO of the CXPA, the Customer Experience Professionals Association. I think this is a pretty terrific how-to book, all about things in customer experience. And if you want a copy of this book, ping me here or directly and say, I want a copy of Michael and Diane's book, and I'll make sure it's on its way to you. Same thing true for this book. This is a book called CX Pro Beyond the Basics. This is a book written by Carl Charisse. He's another good friend I've known for many, many years. What makes this book near and dear to me, especially so, is because Carl had reached out to me when he was preparing this book and asked me to write a section of it. So I had the opportunity to contribute a section to this book specifically about the intersection of AI and CX. And if you'd like a copy of this book or this or both, all I'm going to ask you to do is ask me for them, and I'll make sure they come to you as my gift. Another quick housekeeping topic I want to talk about, since we're still in CX conference season, is the upcoming Forrester Customer Experience North America Conference coming up in Nashville, Tennessee at the end of June. I don't know if you guys are planning to go, but if you are going to be going and have already bought yourself a ticket, do me a favor, come look me up when you're there and come say hi. Let me buy you a drink, or I'll pick up lunch, or whatever you want to do. I'd love to connect with you guys while we're all in Nashville. If you weren't planning on going but might decide you'd like to, it's not too late. Although we're running short on time, my recommendation would be do me a favor and reach out to me and say, hey, I want to go to the Forrester show. One of my business partners is a company called They Do. And They Do was kind enough to give me some discount passes to the conference. I know the conference is not cheap to get into, it's a few $1,000, but they could save us a pretty substantial chunk of money with a discount code that they can give you. So do me a favor, reach out if you want to go to the Forrester conference in a few weeks and say, I want to get a discount pass, and I'll make sure that you get one of those discount codes from my friends at They Do. And with that, I want to say thank you to They Do. You know, I talk about this show, my friends, being one of my most favorite. And I've had an opportunity to talk with a couple of practitioners on this show over the last month or so that I'm really especially proud of. I want to talk about two of them while we're together. The first one was the most recent episode of this show I did just prior to now, where I had a gentleman named Steve Marble join me. Steve is the Senior Director of Customer Experience from a group called Compassion International. They're a not-for-profit group that raises some amazing money and helps feed and clothe and educate children around the world. Steve and his team do amazing work. And if you haven't heard that show, we talked a lot about how we want to reframe what it is that we do from customer experience work to human experience work. Because when you think about it, whether we're customers in a B2B context, a B2C context, whether we're coworkers of one another, it doesn't really matter. This is really coming down to how we treat one another and how we connect with one another as people. And Steve had some really interesting things to talk about the human experience and treating one another, regardless of if you're a customer, a coworker, a total stranger. Let's move the bar higher with how we talk to one another and how we connect with one another in a different way. And Steve talked a lot about that. The other friend I want to talk about is a gentleman named Brian Graves. You guys met Brian on this show a couple of months ago when I brought him on, and we had a great conversation about some of the work that he was doing. If you remember Brian Graves, he was with a company called Redbox. Remember the DVD rental kiosk company? Brian has since decided, since he's been on his own for some time outside of Redbox, he decided I'm going to go into business. And in the most flattering way possible, Brian had reached out and said, hey, the work that I've been doing for the last year really motivated and inspired him to go out on his own. And so now he's started a business, and it's called Orion 7 Solutions, or just Orion 7. If you want to take a look at Brian's work, his new website is www.orion7solutions.com. And I'll put that in my show notes down below if you want to check it out. I hope you will. And if you want, reach out to Brian and talk about his new business. I know he's really proud of that work, and he's doing some amazing things. One other housekeeping thing I want to touch upon while we're together. I in some ways, I feel like I've learned a lesson that may have inadvertently shortchanged you guys in the recent past. If you guys have listened in to other shows that I've done of this particular series, you may recall that I've asked some of my other friends who were guests on that show a recurring question in my conversations with them. And that was, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self something that you wish you knew then about, let's say, customer experience that you now know now, what sort of cheat code or helpful hint would you have given your old self years ago if you had that time machine to go back and tell yourself that? And I thought that was a good question to ask. But it was just last week I was listening to a friend's podcast, and he was talking about this idea of giving yourself a helpful hint in the past. And his attitude about it really gave me a different way to look at it. What he was talking about, he said, I would not go back and tell myself a damn thing. I would not go back and try to change anything. And the reason I wouldn't try to tell myself anything or change anything, he said, I appreciated going through the process of learning and having to make mistakes along the way and getting them right and sometimes and wrong and other times. And the more that I made those mistakes and learned from them, the better I got at what I was doing. And if I had come back and told myself in the past, don't make those same mistakes, do it better this time, the likelihood that I would have this imprinted learning opportunity would have been nearly zero. And so I want to take that question out of my vernacular going forward. I'm going to stop asking my friends about the time travel question going forward, because I think the guy who said that on the podcast was exactly right about having this opportunity to learn, and even the benefits of having what I'm going to call a beginner's mind, where you have this idea where you don't know all the answers, but you have this ability to ask the right questions and explore ideas with an innovation mindset, as opposed to, we always do it a certain way, or what I now know. So more power to my friend on that podcast for the way he looks at these things. I think he was spot on. So I'm striking that question entirely from the conversation. But my friends, all those things are good things, but that's not just the reason that we're here. You're not here to hear me talk about this. You guys have heard me talk a million times on the show already. I want to take a moment to introduce a good friend. This young lady is a special person. I want you to meet a woman named Danielle Wipperfurth. Danielle and I crossed paths just a few months ago for the first time. And I got to tell you, she's a special woman. She really has such a unique point of view about all the things that we're here to talk about, that I was excited to invite her onto the show and have the opportunity just to sit and talk with her for the next, 20 or 30 minutes, specifically about who is she and the things that really motivate her. So what I'd like to do is bring Danielle on, and we'll have a good chat. And I hope you enjoy the conversation that she and I have. Hey, there she is.
Hi, Mark. Good to see you.
Thanks for hanging out here. I'm always, I hold my breath with these video tools. Every time I push the bring to stage button, I go, please work, please work, please work. And there you are. And so I'm always excited when this stuff works. Danielle, before we get into this conversation, I've heard your story. I know who you are. I know how incredibly special you are. But my friends who are out there listening might not know. Can you take a couple of minutes and just kind of talk about you and kind of where you've been, what you did, what you liked about customer experience work, maybe what frustrated you. Just kind of hear about kind of your lane in this space a little bit, because the more we know about that, the better.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. So at the outset of my career, I was very interested in building brands and working from the perspective of marketing, communications, sales, business development. I've been an English major, so language was kind of my core toolkit. And I did that for a while. I ended up moving to India for a while, doing that kind of work on behalf of an incubator for social enterprises.
Wow.
And that was a really great place to both become exposed to creative solutions that may or may not require a lot of resources, as well as, believe it or not, customer experience, because my leadership there was really good at incorporating customer-centric thinking into everything we did and really crafting learning experiences for the leaders we supported and that kind of thing. So when I went to get my MBA, I was interested in building my toolkit beyond communications, which is still important to me, but I wanted to learn about the other parts of a business that you can use to build a solution that aligns with that brand that you're trying to put out there in the marketplace. How do you build something that's completely aligned from what you say you're about to what you actually deliver? And so getting that broad exposure of an MBA was very helpful. And then from there, I went on to apply that primarily in a healthcare and also a retail setting. So worked in a couple of organizations that were primarily focused on prescription medicine. So pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly, Walgreens, and a pharmacy benefit manager. And over the years, really built a core competency around customer experience and delivering that for the full range of healthcare stakeholders. So obviously patients, but you also have to think about pharmacists and doctors and caregivers and insurance companies and kind of everyone in the whole ecosystem. And ultimately what I've found is, as much as I love insights and I appreciate data and I love being grounded in those things, my sweet spot is in taking that and doing something with it, in driving action. So that's where I'm focused in my career today.
I want to go back and talk about this early stuff you talked about in the context of brand for a minute. One of the things that resonates with me, it may become a cliche for some people listening, and if it is, I apologize. But there's a saying these days that really lands with me, which is brand is now who our customers say we are, right? It's taking this outside in view of brand. It's not who we say we are anymore. It's who do our customers say we are. And the more that we can lock in on that, there's an interesting opportunity to really shine, assuming that we could control the narrative a little bit and be able to get out there and tell that story the way we want. So I also hear what you're saying about, you seem to have gravitated to the part of CX where we're taking customer information and we're actioning that information. That what I keep calling the insight to action loop, because I think that's where the rubber hits the road. I mean, that's where you get, the impact. I think we've talked, earlier today, and I said, I know a company or two, maybe more, who are delusional to this day in their belief that if you run a measurement program that stops at measurement, that you're going to get impact. What you're going to get is data, right? You might get some nice dashboards and charts and graphs, but if you don't action, if you don't deploy that in ways that make impact to the business, at best, what you're doing is market research, right? You're getting a data point, and that's, in my mind, a missed opportunity. And so I'm excited to dig into that a little bit with you. I'm going to talk for a second, Danielle, and I want to hear your reaction to this. I want you to tell me why I've lost my marbles completely to say this. I have a lot of friends in the business who are currently, for a variety of reasons, going through a a frustrating job search. And they see, job listings that turn up because, people are looking for CX job listings. And they turn up. But, the concept of customer experience in these jobs has gotten wiped out. They label, they say, you could be a director of customer experience. And what they really mean, bank teller. What they really mean, call center agent. What they really mean is retail sales associate. Anybody in effect who touches a customer in these job descriptions becomes a customer experience person. And I think that's making me nuts. I think that there's a discipline and a science to this type of work that we do and we love. And I hate to see it getting diluted into, if you touch a customer, you're a CX person. So one of the things that I realize, and tell me what your thoughts are about this. I'm not sure that there's a generally agreed upon definition of the term customer experience. I'm struggling with it because I'll tell you why. A lot of my friends who are CX titled professionals will use the term with an absolute 100% sincerity. They'll say the term about themselves, I do customer experience, quote unquote. And I'm not sure even that's a fair statement to make, because to me, the definition of customer experience is not something we do inside our company. We might manage the customer experience, we might measure it, we might improve it, but we don't do customer experience. To me, the term customer experience is the sum total of experiences your customer has that influence their perception of you, your product, your brand, your people, your service, right? And it's not something we do, it's something they do and they perceive. Am I wrong to think that way?
No, I think you're right, Mark. And I like your nuance around the word like do. And really there's different verbs that people have within the company, their role in delivering. And as we all know, it's everyone's job to contribute in some way. And so if this is your responsibility, how do you frame what you're trying to accomplish with that? So I definitely appreciate the broad use of the term. And I think on the one hand, it's kind of a good thing that people at least, want to show that they value it, but it also can create a lot of confusion. And so being really clear about what it is that we bring to the table, I think is really important.
I think so too. And I think, it's one thing, I think it would be fair to say, as a customer experience professional, our jobs have different, we'll call them verbs associated with our actions that we do, right? I might measure the customer experience. I might analyze the data we've captured. I might close the loop with a customer. I might do some outer loop innovation work based on that. I might, do 100 other things. But to say I do CX, I think that's the thing that makes my brain hurt a little bit when people say that. And so I want to be really thoughtful about that. Let's change gears for a minute. You mentioned before kind of your wheelhouse professionally, at least recently, has been sort of split between traditional healthcare and retail, and kind of retail healthcare or healthcare retail, depending on how you look at it. And, I can't speak for retail, but to me, healthcare is a tough industry, to really be a customer-minded person. Because, to me, it was only recently that most healthcare organizations thought of the patient or the member or whoever you call the customer as truly being a customer. It's like prior to the Affordable Care Act, maybe from 10 years ago, there was this idea of almost a hostage situation with the customer, because they, in some ways, if they were in some sort of treatment protocol with a company, it was very hard for them to change gears and leave that company and become disloyal to that company, even if they were not interested in loyalty. They were very, very hard for them to move. But now customers have choices. in their healthcare considerations, right? You know, whether it be self-directed healthcare, whether it be going to Mexico and getting stuff off brand, whatever outlook they want to be able to employ. But I've never seen an industry so afraid to break the mold. I've never seen an industry so fearful to move too far from what they've always done, except potentially pay a little lip service to it. And I can't tell you how many times I've personally met with leaders of these different companies, and their first words out of their mouths are, well, we can't change that. And I say, why not? And their answer is always the same. It's compliance won't allow it. They blame the regulations that they work within. They blame the compliance organizations. They blame the fact that people are managing to the status quo, mostly because there's some pre-established boundaries to what they think they can do. And then they have to sit in that box. And the question is there room to improve the box? What are your thoughts about that in your experience in healthcare?
Yeah, that's a great topic. I think I've thought a lot about this myself as I think about the future and do I want to stay in healthcare? Do I want to do something else? And one of the things I've been exploring is which healthcare companies are have as part of their core strategy that they really need to make the experience good so that they can retain their customers, so that their customers can be healthy and therefore save them money, and that kind of thing. And it's interesting to look at an industry that does claim to be so patient centric, but if you unpack their business models, a lot of the ways that they make money are at least more directly influenced by other types of activities. Mm-hmm. And so it would be difficult for them, given that some of them are publicly traded and all these things, for them to actually prioritize improved experience. Not to mention, like, customers don't always have a lot of choice. They have more now than they used to, but there's still a lot of, your insurance is tied to your employer and all these things. And insurance companies aren't necessarily incentivized to invest in you long term because you may change jobs and then change insurance again. So one thing that's just been central to my career overall, especially as I've evolved, is going from looking at my colleagues and listening to them and wondering why they don't take more patient-centric action, to asking why, to assuming that most people want to make people's lives better, whether they're in healthcare or not. And so then the question becomes, well, why aren't they doing that? What are their incentives? Are there reward structures? Are there metrics they're being held to? Are there, are there regulatory barriers or things like that? Like what are the reasons why they're not necessarily acting in ways that we know will ultimately benefit patients and the business? And that has helped both to lower my blood temperature or blood pressure in terms of not feeling frustrated with my colleagues, but also to find creative solutions. Kind of like you said, there is a lot of complexity, but you can't begin to innovate until you understand where there is room to grow and where you understand, well, why was this system set up that way? Why is the data private? If we use the data this way, did that violate HIPAA, or is it only if we use the data that way? Like, not just taking no for an answer, and obviously respecting the very real, healthcare is a serious subject. There's a reason why there's some guardrails, but finding out where the guardrails are still very much necessary and where people may assume they're guardrails, but there actually aren't.
Yep.
Some of it can become like word of mouth. Like, someone heard from someone else, we can't do that at one point, and then it just kind of becomes lore when that may not be the case. So I think there's very real reasons why it's difficult in healthcare, especially given the way the business is set up in the United States. But I also think there is room for innovation, and that we can only discover by understanding the why behind some of these perceived barriers.
Super interesting. You know, for me, there was a personal story that resonates along the lines of what you're talking about. I was doing consulting work in the area of voice of the customer or voice of the member for a health insurance company in the state of New York. Gosh, it's got to be 15 years ago now. I'm not going to name names. It's going to be a little bit indicting about them. Where, you know, they went out and they changed their CEO. They brought in a new CEO into that job. And she was the ex-general counsel. She was the lawyer for the company. And they promoted her to be the chief executive of the company. I remember sitting with her in her new fancier office, her upgraded office at the company. And I asked about her role with the customers. And she said, I only have one role with our customers, and that's to protect my corporation from them. And I was like, oh my goodness. So we got a little further along in the process, and this is long enough ago where they didn't have any feedback system at the time. So I put a feedback system and program into their organization, and we got some baseline data. And, you know, we discovered very quickly and very loud and clear that the biggest friction spot that was coming up in the members' experience at that health insurance company was this idea that if the doctor says to the patient, you need a certain treatment or protocol or product, you have to, in effect, ask the insurance company in advance, will they approve it? And they get this approval or they get a denial. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, you get one or the other. And when these health insurance companies come back with a denial and they say, no, we're not paying for that thing that your doctor said you need, firstly, bad stuff happens at that point, right? You know, the first thing is the member or the customer or the patient calls up and yells a lot, saying, how dare you think you know more about my health than my doctor? What do you mean, no? And we took a really long look at how they said no, right? And there was a letter, it was like a form letter that comes in the mail. This was not even an email, it was just a letter, a printed letter. And picture a form letter written by some lawyer at the company, like 15 years before that somebody stored in a database somewhere and they used over and over again. And it was like this little itty bitty font and big, giant, scary, confusing words, right? And it was intimidating as hell and confusing. And so I said to the then new CEO, can we rewrite the letter? And she said, we can't just say yes to these people. We need the ability to say no. And I said, it's not about saying yes more. It's about saying no better. And she said, well, what do you have in mind? I said, let's change that letter. And she said, oh, we can't. Why not? Well, compliance won't allow it. Let's go talk to them. Right? So we literally found the compliance guy, the company. And we said, we want to take this letter and turn it into this letter. Is that okay? And the guy looked at him and he goes, you're still saying no, right? We said, yes, but we're just saying no differently. And he said, I don't care then. But to your point, Danielle, it was folklore. It was dogma. It was like this, well, we've always used that letter. So why would we change it now? Right? Because the letter was terrible. And it was causing heartburn for customers. Right? But nobody knew why they couldn't change it. They just felt they couldn't. They just, well, we've used that letter since before I worked here. Right? And I mean, come on, you know, they needed to break that mold. But healthcare seems like it holds on to the past so much that they're so afraid to do it different. And then you get these people who take these, you know, big executive jobs in these companies who sometimes are fortunate enough to come from the outside of the industry. Because, you know, healthcare is so inbred. There's people who have been healthcare lifers and they go from company to company, but they're not from outside. And the reality is bringing people in from the outside, from other industries that are more customer-centered traditional industries could really shake it up a lot, in my opinion, and they could do that really thoughtfully. You know, there's got to be, I mean, I'm telling these stories, you know, from my past. I'd love to hear a story from your past. Would you be willing to share a little bit of an anecdote, for a couple minutes about something you've been through, the jobs that you were part of, where, something happened and this is kind of what you learned from it or what you did about it? I'd love to hear a story.
Yeah, I think continuing on this same line of thought and the importance of asking questions. One of my projects at a previous company involved figuring out, so I was at Walgreens and we were figuring out which prescriptions would be filled off-site and which would be filled on-site. And there was some economic benefits to filling prescriptions off-site, leveraging robotics alongside humans to maximize, the ability to get enough prescriptions back to the store in time and free up the people in store to serve customers. So there was a lot of benefits there. But I was brought in to make sure we were doing it in a customer-centric way.
Interesting.
And yep, because initially a lot of the reason the program was stood up was to allow for cost benefits and yes, to free up teams to support customers, but we needed to make sure that they were still able to get their prescriptions when they needed them. And one of the things I realized was that patients who had acute needs, so like they were just coming out of the operating room or urgent care, they needed their medicine right away. Versus you have other people who they're just filling their regular refill, they've got plenty in stock. They don't necessarily need it within an hour, right? They might be able to get it in a couple of days, that kind of thing. But we weren't necessarily differentiating between those things when we were deciding what to fill off-site and what to fill on-site. And if something was filled off-site, it could take a couple of days to come back. And so identified this very, important patient priority, both from a health as well as a satisfaction perspective, and the potential waste as well, because what would happen is a customer would show up to the pharmacy, it wouldn't be ready because it'd be filled off site. That pharmacist would want to meet their need and would go and fill it really quick. So there was a lot of duplicate fills happening. And so I brought this to the team, and there's a really compelling, clear customer need, compelling health adherence to medicine case, as well as potential efficiency play. But the challenge was there was no way to identify in the system which prescriptions were for acute needs versus more chronic needs. You could use the same medicine for both.
Sure.
And so we could have stopped there and said, well, I guess there's no way to differentiate, move on with our lives. But it was such an important priority for customers that I kept asking questions and we kept exploring. And I worked alongside our product team to understand, what are the possible ways we could identify when something is being given to someone that they need urgently. And they ultimately realized that those medicines all have a shorter number of pills in the bottle, fewer number of pills, that they're not necessarily a full month supply. They're meant, it's a course of antibiotics, it's whatever. So we were able to identify that differentiator and then implement that in the system, and ultimately obviously made customers a lot happier and met their healthcare needs, but also reduced those duplicate fills and that waste in the system by about 66%.
Wow.
So I think, keep asking questions and partner with, your technical partners to make sure you understand what the options are for doing things in creative ways. And then remember that things don't have to be an either or. You don't have to have either cost savings or, your efforts to satisfy and retain customers. Ultimately, it should all be working together. And not to mention, there was a huge employee experience benefit too, because they didn't like having to tell people they didn't have their medicine. They didn't like having to go quick run and fill things ad hoc. You're making their lives a lot smoother and easier too. Sure. So you don't always get the win-win-win scenarios, but I really love it when you can solve multiple problems at once.
Makes perfect sense. I think a lot about technology these days, and one of the things I think a lot about is AI. And we talk here on this conversation, and well as previous ones that I've had with others, that this idea of the human experience can't get lost. But AI seems to be confusing a lot of us in terms of the role the person plays, and is the person even necessary anymore in that equation? Or can we just AIify the job and kind of call it done? I'm highly doubtful myself about rampant AIification right now. I'm kind of overreaching with that. But I'm curious your thoughts and your experiences. What role, if we're going to be very mindful of the human in the human experience, for argument's sake, what's your take these days on technology generally, not just AI, but all the tech stuff? What role does it play in CX? Because I've heard horror stories where vendors have come in and said, implement my tools, you'll have magical outcomes, and then you don't, and people get in all sorts of stink eye trouble from their bosses for overbuying tech on the promise of impact that never comes. What's your take on all that? How do you see the world?
Thanks for that question. I think it's helpful to know what the capabilities of different tools are, so that you can kind of have them top of mind when you're solving problems. But I always like to start problem first. So whether it's you just trying to improve your work output, whether it's you trying to enable your company to get insights, or whether it's you trying to equip your customers with digital tools that can work alongside maybe physical experiences or in-person interactions, you should always start with, like, what are we actually trying to achieve and what are we trying to solve? And is technology the best way, the highest ROI way to solve that? And if so, then of course, like, what is the appropriate role and use of technology, and how do we integrate that with everything else we're doing? The biggest foibles I see are when people are solution first.
Yep.
So we have a mobile app. We should use the app to fix this problem. But in reality, it's an operational problem. It's a process problem. But because a certain team, they own the app, like, they want to try to solve it using that, which I admire teams being scrappy and trying to contribute. But I think some of these problems and opportunities would be much better addressed via, like, cross-functional collaboration. What do we all understand about this issue? And then what is the constellation of solutions, technology, and not, that is actually going to solve this in the best possible way?
That really resonates with me. Again, I've spent most of my work life working for different companies. Almost all, but not exclusively all, were technology suppliers in this space. And so I was amongst the guilty, I'll tell you, who would come in and say, my tech platform XYZ company is going to be the silver bullet that you need to solve all the world's ills, because it's going to be far more impactful than the last technology that didn't make much impact either. And then, you buy this fancy new widget, and the new widget is not any more impactful at face value than the other widget was. Except it really comes down to what you said about yourself earlier. It's how do you action this stuff, right? How do you take the learnings from these tools? These tools could create wonderful opportunities to learn, right? And how do you take these learnings and do something meaningful with it that changes stuff, that you can figure out, oh, that letter that says, no, we're not paying for that claim, right, needs to be fixed, or the process is broken, or it's causing people what my grandmother used to call agita, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that we could learn, but if we don't take the time to think about the post-technology part of the process, we're kidding ourselves. How's your crystal ball these days? Can we talk about the future for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, let's do it.
I want to really get your take on, this whole space is evolving quickly, right? It's what was is no longer relevant, and what's today is not going to be relevant tomorrow. If you were to guess where you think this whole profession is headed, Where do you see it go? If you could just guess, where's it going? Where do you see the future of this role, kind of the CX professional? What does that role look like in, I don't know, 2027?
Yeah. I think a lot is changing very quickly. There's a lot, if you just look at very rapid evolution in technology with AI, you have a lot of companies under a lot of pressure and therefore making a lot of cuts to their employees and restructuring. And so predicting certain elements is difficult. But what I do know is there are certain practices that this field has brought to the fore that need to persist within companies, whether you're using technology to assist with them or not, whether you have a dedicated centralized team or not, whether you have, whether job titles change. That all is, I think, a little bit up in the air, but certain things like the practice of looking at things from the customer perspective and looking at them holistically, not just in silos. So, the whole of the experience, not just how do I feel about this specific app or my interaction or whatever. You need to look at it as a whole picture, and not even just with your company, but like what is their broader context for trying to get this job done for themselves. In healthcare, it's really important. Did they just get a really scary diagnosis? Are they heading into this already extremely stressed? Are they a caregiver with lots of kids and they're trying to bring them into a clinic or a Walgreens or something like that, right? So just understanding the broader context of what someone is going through. And then the ability to prioritize opportunities, both what's most important to customers as well as what's going to make the biggest difference to the bottom line. What's going to drive their behavior to spend more with you and to keep coming back, and ideally, invite their friends as well. So being able to prioritize those things is really important as well. And so whether those all exist in, say, like a director of customer experience role, or whether it's lives in a different function, like those are the things that need to persist, because those are the biggest gaps that I see in organization. You have, silos cannot deliver a cohesive experience. As much as they try, they just don't have the incentives to. They're incentivized to optimize their little piece, not to deliver on the whole. So you need people and you need structures that facilitate the collaboration necessary to make the experience cohesive.
I think you're probably spot on. I don't know. Do you know my friend Eddie Lopez? He currently works at a company called Truist Bank. Do you know Eddie at all?
I don't know Eddie, no.
Eddie has a fascinating role at Truist Bank. If you don't know Truist Bank, it's one of the larger regional banks based in the Southeast. Eddie has a title these days of journey owner. And it's interesting, right? I mean, when I think about what you were saying a moment ago, he's gone from being a customer experience practitioner to owning the key elements of facets of the customer's journey. And these journeys begin long before that customer touches the bank, and they end long after they've left the bank. And the question really remains is, how do we fit the bank into this customer's life, right, in a way that we can improve their lives, not just sell them a checking account, right? And it's interesting to see what the type of work that Eddie and his organization there are doing around understanding both the totality of the journey and then specific elements within it, or kind of sub-journeys within it, right? And to look at it through that lens. It's no different than flipping it from the I do CX mindset to I'm going to improve my customer's life mindset. It's a whole different way to look at it, I think, but fascinating nonetheless. I think that's where the thing's going. It's going to be, building a profession around this concept of that outside in journey owner. And again, there's also the idea that everything old is new again, right? And so a lot of the things that we learn as CX people today kind of come from quality initiatives from 20 years ago, right? So those of us that grew up in the total quality management, the TQM space from a lifetime ago, are seeing all those same principles bubble back up now in kind of the operations of customer experience work. Right? So it's just circular. Every time the clock hits 12, we begin again, right? And we say, okay, we may call it something different, but it's the same thing. Interesting. I just have one really big question I want to get out there with you, and I want to share my thoughts about it too, but you go first. Is there a company or a person that comes to your mind, whether you know them personally or not, that really inspires you? Who do you say, boy, that person or that company just nailed it? Whatever that means to you, I want to know what inspires you.
Ooh, I've got two. So I might mention them both. So two companies that are really inspiring to me that I personally am a customer of are Trader Joe's and Core Power Yoga. Trader Joe's I've been shopping at for years. I really admire their amount of clarity about what their strengths are and their commitment to that and their willingness to say no to other things. They don't do discounts. They don't carry a lot of national brands, but they provide affordable luxuries in the form of flowers and wine. And you always know you're going to have a great interaction with the team member. So much so that election night 2020, do you know where I was?
At Trader
Joe's. Because I was like, where can I go that will help me feel less anxious and will boost my mood? Like, so that, people talk about emotion and experience. If it's when they want to spend time with you in their most stressful moments, I think that says a lot. And then Core Power is a more recent business I've joined as I was looking for a gym locally, and I was really impressed by their onboarding experience. They're very generous with their onboarding. They offer a free week and then a discounted month. They greet you by name and hand you a handwritten note in a packet with like a sticker with the brand you can put on your water bottle, all the information online and in the envelope. They orient you, they give you a free mat and towel. And their site is really well integrated with their backend system. So everything you do when you sign up for a class, they recognize you in their system. It's all integrated. It's very seamless. And I was just really impressed by how they kind of progressively introduce you to how they do things, and also like step you into increasing commitments to the point where I'm actually like a member of their studio now, and I've never been a member anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. But they kind of were so generous up front and really proved the value of what they do and did a really solid job onboarding to the point where I was like, this is a place that I can trust and that I see a level of consistency that's going to be a benefit to my life.
Interesting. I'll share one back. There's a gentleman that I really admire who's a longtime customer experience professional. You may know of him. His name is Curtis Koff. Curtis Koff is a old client and a gentleman who I learn from every time I talk with him. What makes Curtis special to me is, he's had a remarkable career. But one of the things that to me makes it most remarkable is he was intentional about every time he had a job change, he not just left the company, he left the industry behind. And so when you think about, a lot of us, we kind of get in our zone and we look for work, our next job to be just a better version of the job we just left. At least I've done that. Right. And what Curtis has done is said, you know what? I don't want to fall into this trap of being cookie cutter in my thinking. And so you think about his job progression. When I first met Curtis, he was the head of customer experience for a company called Alaska Airlines. And if you've ever known anything about Alaska Airlines, they win the awards every year for being the most customer-friendly, customer-centered airline, like in the known universe. When he left Alaska Airlines, he moved to, of all places, one of the big Blue Cross and Blue Shield health insurance carriers, a company called Primera Blue Cross up in Seattle, where he knew nothing about health insurance other than having had it in his wallet, right? And he came in as the chief customer experience officer there and transformed that entire business and didn't allow them to say no to him on the basis of, well, we've always done it a certain way. He had no prior knowledge of what that way was, so it didn't matter to him how they did it before, right? He just said, let's do it different. And then he left Primera and he wound up at REI, the camping store company, and became, helped them lead the effort to become one of the most customer-centered retail brands that were out there. And now has left REI and went to a company that helps people who are dealing in their lives, managing their diabetes, to help. The company's called Insulet, to help them think about, how do I have a life? Just because I have this diagnosis, it doesn't mean I'm going to not have a life. How do I manage my situation? And again, he's not an expert on diabetes, but he can come in and say, let's have that beginner's mindset and go and ask all the right questions and say, why do we do it that way? Why does it happen like that? Why can't we do it different? And using that Apple concept of thinking different, break the old approach and break the patterns a little bit and inject some new thinking. And so Curtis, to me, has always been a hero of mine. He's always gotten involved and said, I want to think differently about this stuff. And Curtis, keep doing what you do. If you're out there listening, keep doing what you're doing, because it's a good thing. Danielle, we could sit and talk, I don't know, another 8 hours here, but I think we both have stuff to do, as do our friends listening in. So can I just ask, if people listening in want to reach out to you and say, hey, would love to meet you, would love to get some coffee, would love to talk with you, would love to just network with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it something different? What's the right way for them to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Feel free to send me a request.
Cool. I've loved our chat and our chance just to compare notes. I think you and I see the world through a pretty similar lens, and I'm grateful for the time that you've given my friends and me. So thank you for being part of this story and for being here, particularly today. I mentioned at the onset of this episode, I've been doing this work now for a year, these shows for a year. In fact, today is my 1-year anniversary of going out professionally on my own and starting this journey that I've been on around doing this content together and working with companies. And so thank you for being part of my 1-year anniversary episode of this show. It's important to share this with you. I'll share a couple of quick housekeeping things and we'll wrap the show up together here. One of the things I also love doing is talking about new technology, but through the lens appropriately, like you said earlier, of technology plays part of the means. It shouldn't be confused with an ends, but it's part of the means. And one of the companies I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that I really work with and I love is called They Do. They're based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And They Do is a software company in the journey management platform business. They're a fascinating company. They take journey mapping and AI and data integration and put this together in a way that I've never seen done elsewhere. And if you ever want to look for a new way to look at customer journeys or any kind of journeys for that matter, take a look at They Do. It's theydo.com. They're the guys who are sharing with me to share with you guys the Forrester conference discount passes. So if you ever want to go to the Forrester show at the end of June, hit me up and say, give me one of those discount passes, and it's courtesy of those guys at They Do. The co-founder from They Do is going to be on a show with me in a couple of weeks, so we're going to really start to unpack journey management a little bit and what is that vis-a-vis journey mapping, and try to understand the differences in what journey management is about. So we'll come back to you with some dates about that. Last reminder, the books. I talked before about these books. I have on other episodes as well. If you guys want copies of these books, they're my gift to you. Just ask for them, and I'll make sure that you get them over the next few days. I have about a half a dozen of each book left here, so I'm more than happy to share those with you. And again, if you want the Forrester discount, be up for that as well. Danielle, we've made it the hour. Looks like we're coming right up to the top of the hour here. So thank you again for being part of this story. Being here with you is a privilege for me. And I want to say thank you for this. It means a lot that you did this with us.
It was an honor. Thank you, Mark, and congratulations to you.
Couldn't do it without you and my other friends who do this with me. So thank you for being part of this. My friends, thank you for being part of this too. You know, again, all of this would be irrelevant if you guys weren't out there kind enough to listen. So thank you for being who you are and being on this journey with Danielle and me in this case. And, you know, we'll see you again really soon. Stay well and hit me up if you want to talk about things. We're always here to talk. I love talking shop with all of you guys. So thank you for being part of this. Be well. Have great journeys ahead, and we'll see you soon. Take care, my friends.